What would the ancient Greek think if he looked upon modern man? Would he not find him to be something far inferior, far below himself? History does not progress on its own towards an end, especially not towards the good or the just, nor does man naturally evolve towards something higher. Like Eve, like Prometheus, like Hercules, we must take the initiative to shape our destiny and transform ourselves into something higher. The idea of progress is a lie. In fact, it is possible that history as a whole tends towards regression rather than progression. Today, we find ourselves far below the man of the Bronze Age in every way. Our so-called Enlightenment values, the values which rose out of Christianity, the values of the herd, are in no way progressive. What is our God? Equality, that which seeks to level all things, that which is and must necessarily be opposed to excellence, that which always favors the mindless mob over the extraordinary individual. Our modern values are fundamentally anti-life, because life deals in types and the creation of types, and the types which modernity produces are what Nietzsche called the last man. The Overman crept upon us at first as a whisper and a shadow, but now it strikes us as a bolt of lightning from the stormy clouds. Christ, too, was a fiery bolt sent from the clouds to set the world on fire. Christ prepared the way for the Overman. Jesus catalyzed the first transvaluation of all values by completely inverting the moral system of the classical empires. Nietzsche believed that this inversion was detrimental to humanity because the Christian moral system values meekness over strength, beauty of the soul over beauty of the body, self-sacrifice over the triumph of the individual, and so on. In short, Christianity promotes values which, when consistently reinforced over hundreds of years, inevitably create a weaker, gentler type of human being, and thus ensure the triumph of the mob and the herd over the extraordinary individual. These values are therefore anti-life, because life, above all else, strives for the creation of ever more beautiful, strong, and powerful individual forms. But despite his condemnation of Christianity, Nietzsche recognized in Christ a free spirit who stood apart from the herd, a higher type of human being who embraced life fully and had the daring to transvalue all values which had come before him. In Will to Power, Nietzsche even goes so far as to describe the Overman as the Roman Caesar with Christ's soul. Therefore, though Christianity's moral system, generally speaking, may be an impediment to the creation of higher types, because of its emphasis on the values of the herd, the virtue of the meek, the practice of asceticism, and the submission of the body to the soul, Christ himself played a vital role in preparing the way for the Overman. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche writes, "Preludes of Science. Do you really believe that the sciences would ever have originated and grown up if the way had not been prepared by magicians, alchemists, astrologers, and witches, whose promises and pretensions first had to create a thirst, a hunger, a taste for hidden and forbidden powers? Indeed, infinitely more had to be promised than could ever be fulfilled in order that anything at all might be fulfilled in the realm of knowledge. Even as these preludes and preliminary exercises of science were not by any means practiced and experienced as such, the whole of religion might yet appear as a prelude and an exercise to some distant age. Perhaps religion could have been the strange means to make it possible for a few single individuals to enjoy the whole self-sufficiency of a god and his whole power of self-redemption. The alchemists, convinced that there was a secret of great value hidden in matter, relentlessly pursued their visions of transformation, gold, and immortality. unaware that such pursuits would lead to the birth of science and man's mastery over matter. Unconsciously, they strove towards an ideal, unaware of what they were building the foundations for. Christianity served the same purpose for the creation of the Ubermensch. For hundreds of years, Europe's consciousness was captivated by the image of Christ, the ideal human being, half God, half man, a superman who refused to submit his will to the herd. Just as alchemy prepared man's spirit for the pursuit of science, Christianity cultivated a hunger in man's spirit for the emulation of a superhuman ideal, and disciplined man's will towards the pursuit of that ideal. Just as Catholic typology created the framework which we have used in this series to understand the Ubermensch as a teleological principle and to examine his types and forerunners in our mythologized history of mankind's evolution and development, Christ created the framework for the ideal of the Superman. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche writes, "On new philosophers, we have no other choice. On spirits that are strong and original enough to give impetus to opposing value judgments, and to revalue, to reverse eternal values. On forerunners, on men of the future, who in the present will forge the necessary link to force a 1,000-year-old will onto new tracks. They will teach humans that their future is their will, that the future depends on their human will." We free spirits are now ready to embark on the second transvaluation of all values, and shift the ancient will towards the Promethean ideal, the Herculean ideal, the Christian ideal, onto new tracks. It is our task to be the so-called necessary links between this ancient will and the ideal which it posited. It is our task to harness this will towards the creation of the Ubermensch and the birth of a new, heroic ideal. The struggle against Plato, or to put it more clearly, for the common people, the struggle against thousands of years of Christian ecclesiastical pressure, for Christianity is Platonism for the common people, has created a splendid tension of the spirit in Europe, such as the earth has never seen. With this kind of tension in our bow, we can now shoot at the most remote targets. We free spirits have it still, all the distress of the spirit and all the tension of its bow. And perhaps the arrow too, the task, who knows, the target. Now a great struggle ensues, the struggle to define the new age, the struggle to direct humanity upon a new course, the struggle for new values. Zarathustra gripped the tree under which the youth sat and spoke thus, "If I wished to shake this tree with my hands, I should not be able to do it, but the wind, which we do not see, tortures and bends it in whatever direction it pleases. It is by invisible hands that we are bent and tortured worst." Then the youth arose, disconcerted, and said, "I hear Zarathustra, and just now I was thinking of him." Zarathustra answered, "Why should that frighten you? But it is the same with man as it is with the tree. The more he seeks to rise into the heights and light, the more vigorously do his roots struggle earthward, downward, into the dark and deep, into evil." "Yes, into evil," cried the youth. "How is it possible that you have discovered my soul?" To understand the tremendous struggle which is taking place all around us, we must first understand what values are. Values, fundamentally, are the expressions of various wills. To desire something is to deem it valuable in the service of a certain will. Instincts are complex hierarchies of interrelated wills, desires, and value judgments, which, over millions of years of evolution, have proved to be most useful in service of the fundamental will to life, or as Nietzsche would describe it, the will to power. Each individual is made up of various conflicting wills and instincts, just as we are made up of various cells which could each be considered to be life forms on their own. But ultimately, one will, one instinct must prevail over the others for an organism to function properly. Groups, like individuals, can be viewed as a collection of often conflicting wills organized behind one or several wills, instincts, values. This is how Carl Jung arrived at his theory of archetypes. For him, religions are instinctual value systems, expressing the most profound values of a culture. Gods are artistic representations of archetypal instincts, ancient, profound wills which transcend the individual. In Man and His Symbols, Jung wrote, "Inner motives spring from a deep source that is not made by consciousness and is not under its control." In the mythology of earlier times, these forces were called mana, or spirits, demons, and gods. Individuals degenerate and become decadent when they lose contact with their instincts, when their will becomes exhausted and their ideals die. So it is with civilizations. Civilizations collapse when their gods die. The most famous passage from Nietzsche's Zarathustra is as follows: "God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to cleanse ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it?" This passage is from Zarathustra's parable on the madman, and predicts the collapse of our civilization and value systems in the wake of the death of the Christian God. In reply to this passage, Carl Jung wrote, "It has for some ears the same eerie sound as that ancient cry which came echoing over the sea to mark the end of the nature gods." He continues, "Life has gone out of the churches, and it will never go back. The gods will not reinvest dwellings that once they have left. The same thing happened before, in the time of the Roman Caesars, when paganism was dying. According to legend, the captain of a ship passing between two Greek islands heard a great sound of lamentation and a loud voice crying, 'Great Pan is dead.' When this man reached Rome, he demanded an audience with the emperor, so important was his news. Then came this message, 'Pan is dead. Great Pan, who is God, is dead. Only man remains alive.' After that, the one God became one man, and this was Christ, one man for all. But now that too is gone. Now every man has to carry God. The descent of spirit into matter is complete." Carl Jung noted that God, or the gods, had died before. For Jung, the cyclical death and rebirth of God could be seen in the symbolism of the zodiac. The death and rebirth of God, whether Osiris, Dionysus, or Christ, is celebrated seasonally. Mirroring the daily path of the sun, God dies and descends into the underworld in the winter, only to be reborn again in the spring, as the sun is reborn each dawn. But in addition to the Earth's seasonal rotation through the zodiac, the Earth's axis also makes a slow, circular procession, spending roughly 2,000 years in each house of the zodiac. We briefly touched upon this astrological symbolism earlier in the series when Hercules freed Prometheus and took the heavens on his shoulders, becoming the axis of the earth and symbolically replacing Prometheus as the god of the new age. This symbolism occurs again with Christ, who becomes the axis mundi upon the cross, which is widely interpreted as the tree of life in Christian theology. On the cross, Christ became the God and archetypal man of the new age. It so happens that Christ was born during the transition from the great year of Aries into the great year of Pisces. The first Christian symbol was a fish meant to represent Christ. This fish was often accompanied by the ancient Greek word for fish, ichthus, which is an acronym for Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Now, roughly 2,000 years later, the axis of the Earth is moving out of the constellation of Pisces and into Aquarius. Jung wrote, "The vernal equinox is moving out of the sign of Pisces into the sign of Aquarius, just as it did out of Taurus, the old bull gods, into Aries, the ram-horned gods, and then out of Aries, the sacrificed lamb, into Pisces." The birth of Christ catalyzed the dethroning of the classical empires, represented in the Bible as horned beasts, and the demonization of the classical gods. Nietzsche called this event the first transvaluation of all values, a reversal of every moral valuation which had come before. For Jung, the two fish of the Pisces sign represented Christ and Satan, and the Aion of Pisces was characterized by the tension between these two opposing forces. The first half of the Christian age focused on Christ, the Spirit, the Saint, the Good, the Kingdom of Heaven, while the second half was marked by the Enlightenment and the birth of science, a movement towards the earth and matter, and a focus on the figure of the genius. Goethe's Faust perhaps best represents the spirit of this age. Faust, an elderly scholar, turns away from his esoteric, spiritual pursuits, finding that they have yielded him nothing, and makes a bargain with Mephistopheles to regain his youth and enjoy earthly pleasures. In Aion, Carl Jung writes, "The ideal of spirituality, striving for the heights, was doomed to clash with the materialistic, earthbound passion to conquer matter and master the world." This change became visible at the time of the Renaissance. The word means rebirth, and it referred to the renewal of the antique spirit. We know today that this spirit was chiefly a mask. It was not the spirit of antiquity that was reborn, but the spirit of medieval Christianity that underwent strange pagan transformations, exchanging the heavenly goal for an earthly one, and the vertical of the Gothic style for a horizontal perspective, voyages of discovery, exploration of the world, and of nature. The subsequent developments that led to the Enlightenment and the French Revolution have produced a worldwide situation today, which can only be called anti-Christian, in a sense that confirms the early Christian anticipation of the end of time. It is as if, with the coming of Christ, opposites that were latent till then had become manifest, or as if a pendulum had swung violently to one side, and were now carrying out the complementary movement in the opposite direction. No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Christ is without blemish, but right at the beginning of his career, there occurs the encounter with Satan, the adversary, who represents the counterpole of that tremendous tension in the world psyche which Christ's advent signified. Both strive for a kingdom, one for the kingdom of heaven, the other for the Principatus Huius Mundi. We hear of a reign of 1,000 years and of a coming of the Antichrist, just as if a partition of worlds and epochs had taken place between two royal brothers. Jung believed that in order to transition into the next age, we would have to reconcile the two opposing forces which had occupied the age of Pisces and integrate the shadow of Christianity. While Jung laid out the complex religious and astrological symbolism which accompanied the great shift which took place leading up to and during the first millennium, Nietzsche understood it perhaps more practically in terms of morality and instinct. Nietzsche called this great shift the first transvaluation of all values, the complete inversion of the classical moral system. He believed that this inversion marked a shift from a life-affirming value system, which exalted and celebrated life, to a system of life-denying morality. For Nietzsche, absolute morality, absolute concepts of good and evil, are inherently anti-life, and arise from an exhausted will which no longer has the strength to say yes to life. Life is fundamentally amoral, and therefore systems which place the good as higher than life must necessarily condemn life and the earthly, which is continually found to be in the wrong, when judged by the standards of the ideal good. During the first transvaluation of values, the pagan values which were overthrown were repressed, and yet they were preserved in the figure of the Antichrist. To the Christians, the nature gods of the classical age took on the look of demons, and the classical virtues became vices. Viewed from this perspective, Jung's so-called anti-Christian age was simply the return of the suppressed pagan values, the return of the classical spirit. The classical empires were ruled by demons, said the Christians. Everything which was once good is now evil. All which was once evil is now good. The lowest shall be the highest, and the first shall be the last. For Nietzsche, what followed this inversion was a slow degeneration, sickening, and dwarfing of mankind, under the disease of Christianity, which seeks to level all great things and attacks the passions and instincts for being amoral, the very forces which drive life towards a higher ideal. For Nietzsche, what was necessary was a second transvaluation of values, a total inversion of all Enlightenment, rationalist, utopian, and life-denying worldviews and values which arose from Christianity, a return to the Greek, Dionysian spirit, a return to the pagan. Nietzsche wrote, "We few or many who again dare to live in a dismoralized world, we pagans in faith, we are probably also the first to grasp what a pagan faith is, to have to imagine higher creatures than man, but beyond good and evil, to have to consider all being higher as also being immoral. We believe in Olympus, and not in the crucified." As we have seen in recent times, the moralist, the good man, is at best an obedient sheep, and at worst the schoolmaster's ruler to crack over the knuckles of those who would dare stand apart from the herd, the leveling, equalization, and homogenization of mankind, and the creation of weak, servile, moral men in service of that end is humanity's greatest danger. If we are to avoid the total collapse of our civilization, we need a higher type of man, like those gleaming heroes of the Bronze Age, to rise above the absolute, life-denying morality of the herd and posit a new, life-affirming goal for mankind. In Will to Power, Nietzsche wrote, "Thus I guessed to what extent a stronger type of man would necessarily have to conceive the elevation and enhancement of man as taking place in another direction, higher beings, beyond good and evil, beyond those values which cannot deny their origin in the sphere of suffering, the herd, and the majority. I sought in history the beginnings of this construction of reversed ideals, the concepts pagan, classical, noble, newly discovered and expounded. In Thus Spake Zarathustra, Nietzsche chose the character of Zarathustra as his prophet to usher in this reversal of values. In Ecce Homo, Nietzsche wrote, "People have never asked me, as they should have done, what the name of Zarathustra precisely meant in my mouth, in the mouth of the first amoralist. For that which distinguishes this Persian from all others in the past is the very fact that he was the exact reverse of an amoralist. Zarathustra was the first to see in the struggle between good and evil the essential wheel in the working of all things. The translation of morality into the realm of metaphysics as force, cause, end in itself is his work. But the very question suggests its own answer. Zarathustra created this most portentous of all errors, morality. Therefore, he must be the first to expose it, not only because he has had longer and greater experience of the subject than any other thinker, but because of the more important fact that Zarathustra was the most truthful of thinkers. In his teaching alone is truthfulness upheld as the highest virtue. That is to say, as the reverse of the cowardice of the idealist who takes to his heels at the sight of reality. Zarathustra has more pluck in his body than all other thinkers put together, to tell the truth and to aim straight. That is the first Persian virtue. Have I made myself clear? The overcoming of morality by itself, through truthfulness. The moralist's overcoming of himself in his opposite, in me. That is what the name Zarathustra means in my mouth. Nietzsche cites the origin of absolute good and evil in the Persian religion of Zoroastrianism, and thus chose the Zoroastrian prophet Zarathustra as the figure who would overcome all life-denying moralities and posit a new goal for humanity. With Zarathustra as his bow, Nietzsche set his sights upon a new type of man, a man who had overcome the nihilistic, life-suppressing worldview of the herd, the Overman. As John the Baptist announced the coming of Christ, Nietzsche and his Zarathustra prepared the way for the Overman. As we move into a new age, many other forces are also preparing their great transvaluations, reversals, and resets. But when we look to the heavens, we see that the pole of our earth moves towards the sign of Aquarius. Could it be the new god is a man? As we look to the stars, our gaze returns to the earth, to ourselves. What do we hope for? To be filled with health and vitality, to become beacons of beauty and power. And what is in this new man's overflowing jar? Perhaps a flood to cleanse the earth of nihilism? Perhaps an intoxicating wine to send man into a Dionysian frenzy? Perhaps a new lust for life? Industrial society has cut us off from our instincts and destroyed all natural ways of living for modern man. In him, the lion is conquered. His life is empty and meaningless. He lacks tribe, tradition, or purpose. He lacks an understanding of his body, of history, and of any goal in the future. He must spiritually mutilate himself to conform to the conditions of modernity. And worse, his body is being poisoned. The modern health crisis is perhaps the greatest danger which humanity has yet faced. Microplastics, endocrine disruptors, seed oils, processed sugars, internet addiction, dopamine overload. We are making ourselves sick. Christianity, democracy, industrialization. What kind of men have these conditions created? Meek, sickly, cowardly men. The weakening, leveling, and regression of the human being and of mankind as a whole into a meek, easily manipulated, mindless herd. Why is it bad that man should become meek, harmless, good? Why is it bad that he should extol the virtues of equality and justice? Because these words, in their modern use, are only beautiful masks of virtue, covering the sallow faces of those power-hungry tyrants who would bend the masses to their will. In today's age, the virtuous man is no longer he who stands in opposition to the tyranny of both rulers and mobs. The virtuous man, the good man, is the weapon of the tyrant. In Thus Spake Zarathustra, Nietzsche wrote, "Thus I speak to you in parable, you who make souls whirl, you preachers of equality. To me you are tarantulas and secretly vengeful, but I shall bring your secrets to the light. Therefore I laugh in your faces with my laughter of the heights. Therefore I tear at your webs, that your rage may lure you out of your lie holes, and your revenge may leap out from behind your word, justice. For that man be delivered from revenge, that is for me the bridge to the highest hope, and a rainbow after long storms. The tarantulas, of course, would have it otherwise. What justice means to us is precisely that the world be filled with the storms of our revenge. Thus they speak to each other. We shall wreak vengeance and abuse on all those whose equals we are not. Thus do the tarantula hearts vow, and will to equality shall henceforth be the name for virtue. And against all that has power we want to raise our clamor. You preachers of equality, the tyrannomonia of impotence clamors thus out of you for equality. Your most secret ambitions to be tyrants thus shroud themselves in words of virtue. Our corrupted priestly class, the preachers of equality, use the morality of the herd as a weapon of mass control. The power which these priests of modernity seek is not the noble beauty, strength, and overflowing health of the lion. The power they seek is the cold grip of the tyrant. What has created the conditions for these tyrants? The degeneration of the instincts. Generations of instinctual repression and unnatural living conditions has led their natural will to power, their will to life, to be corrupted. From this repression and weakening of the instincts arises their anti-natural ideologies: transhumanism, posthumanism, the utopian end of history, and the like. The priestly ideal, that is, the ascetic ideal, arises in sickly and degenerating organisms as a last attempt at the preservation of life. At the center of this ideal is the desire to escape life, which is expressed in their crusade against nature, against the body, against the instincts, against life itself. Their desire to take revenge against life arises from their impotence. They are nature's failures, but rather than recognize that they are the sick ones, the priests use the mask of their moral righteousness to condemn nature as evil and seek revenge against her, and the resentment of the masses is their tool to achieve this end. But there is hope. In the self-improvement, bodybuilding, and extreme health communities, the beginnings of a counter-movement is forming. Nothing short of a miracle has taken place. From among their ranks, a higher type is arising, with beautiful, strong bodies and the carefree spirit of the conquering lion. They are not yet fully conscious of what they are striving towards, but one thing is certain. In them, an ancient spirit returns, the spirit of excellence. The highest virtue of the ancient Greeks was not equality, but arete. Arete means excellence in the sense of realizing one's potential to the highest degree in all ways: strength, wit, daring, beauty. This idea was the foundation of Greek aristocracy, ruled by the best, the most excellent, the most virtuous. For the Greeks, the virtuous man was not the meek man who obediently conformed to the herd. It was the man who strove to be the best in all ways and to elevate himself to the Olympian heights of excellence. The Greek heroes, beautiful, carefree, triumphant, represented nature's highest types and the realization of the fullest potential of the human being. Now, against all odds, the heroic ideal is rising again. Or could it be that the weakening and leveling of mankind has created the perfect conditions for the reemergence of this ancient ideal? Long ago, the heroic ideal became decadent, and the statues of this ideal were torn from their pedestals and defaced. False ideals, the priests called them. We noble ones strive for virtue of the soul, they said. We noble ones see the fruitlessness of life. We noble ones see the evil in the heart of life. We are filled with wisdom. We see through life's deception. Therefore we condemn life and strive against it. We wish to make the body ill. We shall make man sick with disgust at himself. We shall make the whole world sick with disgust at life. But could it be that out of this great sickness arises an even greater health? An overflowing beauty, strength, and power which even the Greeks could not have dreamed of. What are the signs that the heroic ideal is rising again? Superheroes, the ideal of the Superman, the appeal of the superhuman, that which stands above man in beauty, power, and strength. The desire for the primal man, the barbarian, Conan. Disgust with civilization and a desire to return to a natural way of living. The Walking Dead, Fight Club. bodybuilders and fitness culture, chasing perfection in the human form, the beautiful man, the powerful man, the strong man, once again prioritized over the meek and the moral. All these are signs of a new ideal arising, or should I say, an ancient ideal re-emerging. The unconscious desire for a collapse of civilization and a so-called return to nature or to the instincts is not a regressive impulse, but rather a desire to reverse the regressive trajectory of modernity and begin again to strive upwards towards nature and her ideals. Nietzsche wrote, "Nature uses illusion to obtain her objectives. The true goal is concealed by a deluding image. We stretch our hands out towards this image, and nature reaches its goal through our deception. Nature's deluding image is the heroic ideal. The true goal, a creature of tremendous beauty, power, and overflowing health." Nietzsche makes this goal visible to us in the ideal of the Ubermensch, which is, in essence, a revival of the pagan heroic ideal. What does modernity mean for us, for those who have managed to remain free spirits? Does it mean the leveling of mankind into one meek, obedient herd? Quite the opposite. This leveling has cleared the way for the creation of something new, that is, if we are up to the challenge. In our journey from the inception of mankind to modernity, we have looked at various figures whose associated myths represent significant transformations and evolutions of our species. The Ubermensch is the first unrealized or ahistorical figure in our series. He does not lay in our mythological past, but rather as an ideal in the future, intended to inspire us to break free of modernity. Individually, the Ubermensch represents the man who can overcome the nihilism of modernity and create something new out of man, as Eve, Prometheus, and Hercules did. Collectively, the Ubermensch represents a great health rising out of the sickening and weakening of mankind, which modernity has brought upon us. He represents man, having gone through the crucible of history, returning again to a natural way of living, in alliance again with the will of nature and her goals. In positing the Ubermensch as a new goal for humanity, Nietzsche brings the Judeo-Christian idea of a goal in history or beyond history to a pagan worldview. Thus, the Ubermensch represents what might be called a classical conception of progress, the Promethean progressivism of the hero who strives towards the superhuman ideals represented by his gods. In contrast, the last man, who is the product of the decadence and nihilism of modernity, represents a regressive force, as do the technocratic priests who he serves. By positing the Ubermensch as the goal of history, we rebuke the liberal idea of progress and transvalue the whole of the Judeo-Christian morality on which it stands. In other words, we dare to go beyond good and evil. For us, the good is all that elevates and strengthens life. The bad is all which weakens and drags it down. In Nietzsche's Ubermensch, the heroic ideal of the Greeks is resurrected, the Dionysian image of life in abundance, life triumphant over the spirit of gravity. We stretch out our hands towards this image, and nature reaches its goal through us. We have the unique opportunity to be the new Aristos, the beautiful, the good, the most excellent, and I hope you will join me as we embark on this journey. Now we shall end this series where it began, on the tree on the mountain. Zarathustra put his arm around the youth and led him away, and when they had walked together for a while, Zarathustra began to speak thus: "It tears my heart, better than your words tell it. Your eyes tell me of all your dangers. You are not yet free, you still search for freedom. You are weary from your search and over-awake. You aspire to the free heights, your soul thirsts for the stars. But your wicked instincts, too, thirst for freedom. Your wild dogs want freedom. They bark with joy in their cellar when your spirit plans to open all prisons. To me you are still a prisoner who is plotting his freedom. Alas, in such prisoners the soul becomes clever, but also deceitful and bad, and even the liberated spirit must still purify himself. Much prison and mustiness still remains in him. His eyes must still become pure. Indeed, I know your danger, but by my love and hope, I beseech you, do not throw away your love and hope. You still feel noble, and others too feel your nobility, though they bear you a grudge and send you evil glances. Know that the noble man stands in everyone's way. The noble man stands even in the way of the good, and even if they call him one of the good, they thus want to do away with him. The noble man wants to create something new, and a new virtue. The good man wants the old and to preserve the old. But this is not the danger of the noble man, that he might become one of the good, but a churl, a mocker, a destroyer. Alas, I have known noble ones who lost their highest hope. They then slandered all high hopes. They lived shamelessly in brief pleasures and barely cast their goals beyond the day. Spirit too is lust, they said. Then the wings of their spirit broke, and now their spirit crawls about and soils what it gnaws. Once they thought of becoming heroes, now they are voluptuaries. The hero for them is an offense and a terror. But by my love and hope, I beseech you, do not throw away the hero in your soul. Hold holy your highest hope. Thus spake Zarathustra.